Brothers, sisters, here's what Shiva has taught me. What Shiva has taught me is that if you must fight, you must realize that physical aggression, external warfare, even in the social realm, even in the political realm, should only be committed to if there is no other recourse. If compromise cannot be met, if there are two people, two parties, two opposing viewpoints who cannot meet and understand one another, at least on the most basic of levels, most basic of human compassion, then warfare must begin. But just like with societal warfare, warfare itself, actual literal warfare, the combat between warriors, between armies, between nations, should only be resorted to if and when it is the last resort, but then it can only be done spiritually. To commit to spiritual warfare is something that we learn about within. When we start to analyze ourselves, start to realize the nature of our own anger, our own hatred, our own ignorance, our own laziness, and start to fight it, that's when we start to train with the spiritual warfare that will greet the world through us. Spiritual warfare is the only kind of warfare that can bring any good in the world, any good in society, any good for yourself and the people around you. Spiritual warfare, we train within, as I said. But when it comes down to it, we have to understand that the forces of materialism, the forces of corporatism, the forces of capitalism and communism, materialism on different sides of the spectrum, but both very extreme, if they are not mitigated, if they are not meeting each other somewhere in between. The extreme right, the extreme left, when taken to either end, they become very materialistic. They become self-obsessed. They become so devoted to their own idea of themselves that they neglect to ask any other people with any other ideological scope what they think, what they want to bring to the table. That's why extremism always brings materialism, always brings suffering, always kicks the little man down, and destroys the middle class. Now, in many countries, impoverished nations do not have a large majority of middle class as the first world countries do in this world. But when we look at the people who survive in third world countries and first world countries, people in third world countries rely on spirituality, religion, far more than people in first world countries. Because it's easy to believe in God when you're comfortable, when you don't have to do much, and your spiritual life declines. Your spiritual influence on your environment and your environment's influence on you decreases. But if you're impoverished, if you have to rely on that nature within, that deep spiritual nature within, in order for you to manifest anything through magic in your life, through supernatural forces, through spiritual energy in your life, then, and only when that is one of the major ways out, that's when a people become spiritual. That's when a people become spiritual, because you rely upon that energy. You rely upon cultivating your own spiritual, magical, what have you, power. Now, Shiva has taught me that the only way to commit to warfare, the only way to bring proper results in the world, in a warring way, I guess you could say, is to fight wars spiritually. Now, the war that we find in relation to the United States attacking, Afghanistan and Iraq, we see that it wasn't about spiritual warfare. It was all political. It was all about getting their resources and getting a foothold to place more bases, under the guise of pursuing those who attacked us on 9/11, under the guise of pursuing nuclear weapons, which we have found out, not even recently, but a while back, that those were false pretenses. Now, it's easy to take out an extreme leader. It's easy to take out an extremist group of any religion or any political ideology relative to starting a war. And the way that you do it is to send in strike teams. That's how we took out Osama bin Laden. So, when we focus less on the material aspects of war, we start to realize effective war. We start to realize, okay, we can take out these people easily with a strike team and not start a war against an entire nation. So how did Shiva teach me this? Shiva has been inspiring me for a long time. He has been showing me that spiritual warfare itself involves understanding materialism and fighting that within that urge to just dive into external war, to not truly understand the situation, to not truly have the proper motivations, to be completely conscious of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. Now, he has taught me that external war is just a projection of an internal society's problem. So the internal problem that society has, it will seek to solve that problem externally through war. There was a terrible fear after 9/11 that of the foreigner, of they who were somewhere else and had the possibility and potential of attacking us. It had always existed. It's always been boiling in the heart of every American before 9/11. And it has bubbled up to the point where it just needed the trigger of 9/11 when Al-Qaeda attacked the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and the White House will try to attack the White House. It just needed that little trigger in order for our society to jump at the opportunity to attack something foreign. Now, we do this on a personal level. We do this on an individual level. And we must watch ourselves. We must understand our motivations and why we are doing what we're doing externally in the world. Whether it be societal war, whether we're going to work and fighting with different employees because we have to have that sense of power, or we think that we're really wronged, and we have to show that we are not to be trifled with. Or perhaps in our relationships, that you want to be equal so much that you end up pushing your spouse down or your children down. Or perhaps we want to be supreme spiritually or intellectually. And we start to look at other people in our congregation and say, they're not as spiritual as me. They don't know what they're talking about. Hell, maybe they even say the pastor doesn't know what they're talking about, the priest or the imam, the Brahmin. And you start to think, I know more than all of these people because I am closer to God. That's when the real trouble starts. That's when personal extremism brings a kind of opposite of spiritual warfare. Completely material, completely focused on you being the supreme authority in your spiritual life, but not really knowing as much as you think you do. And demanding of the world to recognize you as the supreme authority spiritually, societally, romantically. That is where spiritual warfare is turned on its head and we descend into ego. We descend away from true power, and that is the power of connection, that is the power of truth, that is the power of correctly committed to spiritual warfare. Now I've explained it externally and internally. Spiritual warfare has to do with not being materialistic, not expecting yourself to be the authority, but taking your spiritual path in your hand and saying, this is mine, but I will learn from other people because there is still further growth to progress in. There is still more steps along my path that I have not taken yet. I need help. Accept that you need help. Just as a nation should not be triggered so easily, should consider all of its options before launching its missiles, before launching armies. But throughout history, we have humanity does not have a good foundation or examples of thinking before acting. So we must think before we act, externally in society and in our internal relationship and that relationship to society. We must understand spiritual warfare. This is what Shiva has taught me. Shiva has taught me spiritual warfare and when it should be committed to and how. Thank you very much for watching. Namah Shivaya, and I will see all of you in the future.